Welcome to the Music Maker's Cookbook, the podcast that helps independent artists cook up recipes for success in the music industry. I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And today's got a great episode going on today. We're going to be diving into production, which is something that Brandon has been doing a lot more focus on lately, but a lot of experience in it, a lot more than I do. But if you're new here, before we dive into the nitty-gritty topic, we like to do a quick kind of appetizer where we have a conversation that we kind of riff on and then invite you to answer in the comments below and let us know your thoughts on it. And today it is a kind of relevant one to this whole production side of things, which is how do you prevent your music from going stale?
Yeah, this one's a tough one because like a lot of the time I see sometimes musicians and artists fall into the trap of doing the same thing over and over again. And that can be okay, especially if you have a band or a sound that's cultivated on doing the similar thing each and every time. Your fans know what to expect and they like that from you. Like that can be okay. That could be fine. But
kind of like how every episode we start off with, welcome to Music Maker's Cookbook.
Exactly. There's beauty in consistency, right? But consistency can often lead to staleness, right? Especially when it's consistency that's not intentional sometimes, you know? If you're just having to fall back into the same rhyme schemes, you happen to fall back into the same choices for instrumentation, you know, same chord structures, same song structures, which that can be, that's a different topic for a different song structures is usually one of the hardest ones to break.
And it's also sometimes the least beneficial to break because people expect a certain intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus.
Totally agree.
Outro.
That one's way tougher, and that one's a whole can of worms, honestly. But it can get tough because if you're not conscious of being like, hey, I'm doing this over and over again, and music gets stale real quick. It can, you know. So some of the ways that I like to kind of switch it up is honestly getting new things, and like that doesn't always mean buying new things. Like that can also mean using a free trial of something and be like, oh, this sound is really cool, maybe I can recreate it into something else, right? Or being an active listener to your favorite artist, right? Like an active listener.
I think that's a key thing. Like go diving into, okay, what exactly is it that gives me that little unique spin on it? What are they playing around with? Is there anything textural that they're layering on top? Not just that vocal, and like maybe there's some things in the background that you don't really necessarily hear, but you feel, or you hear on the 10th time. Like I agree with that so much.
So key. Like I've done a thing before where when I was kind of learning like the folk genre a little bit more, because I worked on a lot of folk this year, I actually sat down, like I would do it like once a week or something. I'd listen to a folk track by somebody. I'm trying to think. Gregory Alan Isakov, right? Like, let's take him for example.
Dude, folk is my jam. That's what I do. Like 80% of the mixes I do. I would say 80% of the people within those 80% of the folk mix I do will give me Gregory Alan Isakov as the reference for the sound they're going for.
Same. I've gotten that every single time I've worked on a folk track.
He just got it.
He's elite. He's like echelon, top tier, you know? And like, I'll sit down and I'll study. And like, what I'll do is I'll actually write down what I hear, you know, in my iPad notes. I haven't done this exercise in a really long time, but it actually helped me kind of cultivate like, oh, this we could use this for this. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we bring it into a song, right, with somebody else? And then that keeps things fresh because you're always trying something new and you're like, oh, I remember he did this thing here. This would sound good in my track, you know, something similar, right? Because we all take influence from somewhere. So being an active listener is so important, so important. Instead of being like, I really like this song, tell me why you like this song, right? Like really dive in and understand what makes this song so likable to you, and then try to use something like that in your song. I had one other thought about keeping things fresh, but I can't seem to remember it now. It's been happening so much lately.
No, it's fair.
Yeah,
I really like that. I think keeping things fresh can be kind of like on the production side. There's the post and then the pre and then the post. The pre being while you're composing and recording and creating the song, and the post of once the song is released. How do you keep your song from going stale once it's out there? How do you keep people from getting so familiar with it that they don't care about your song anymore?
Great point.
That's a whole different conversation that relies around things that you're putting out around it. And basic things you can do to kind of keep it fresh is releasing live recordings or acoustic versions or breakdowns.
Slowed versions.
Exactly. Or just creating different videos. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't make a short music video for a song you released 2 years ago.
Right.
In fact, sometimes like the songs that really pop off on social media are the ones that have been out for years.
Yeah, it's true.
So nothing saying you can't. I think honestly you should be doing stuff like that.
Especially if you have a dance involved with it too.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is like TikTok heavy, and then that can push you really far on TikTok alone, you know. So if you can come up with like a clever dance, or like Sean said, like a clever video that can be 30 seconds, you know, 10 seconds, whatever, to a song that you uploaded years ago, keep it fresh, right? That can help out so much.
Oh yeah,
so
or
much.
like a personal reflection of like, man, I've grown so much from the space I was in when I wrote this.
Oh yeah.
Or like a before and after this song with my, like there's so many things you can do in the post thing. But in the pre thing, which is where I think we're kind of going to end up focusing a lot today, something that I think that is good to keep things from going stale is oftentimes people are like, oh, let's try adding this or throw that in, or let's add this delay or this effect or this pad or this guitar, let's put a banjo on or acoustic on it, or add this drum fill. A lot of times what can be most impactful is removing things.
Yeah.
And that's
true.
the hardest thing to do when you're composing. And one of the hardest things to do in the studio is actually look at it and be like, okay, what can we take away?
Yep.
The more I listen to like a lot of really big, awesome, powerful songs, the more I realize that during the verses, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
It's literally oftentimes just vocal and bass and drums, or just vocal and acoustic, and then maybe a couple things get layered in, and then the chorus is where it's all at, but then it cuts right back down to just vocal and bass and drums, or just vocal and acoustic, and maybe an atmospheric sort of textural thing.
Yep.
So it can be hard, especially when you're in a group of where everyone wants to play.
Oh sure.
And everyone's got like, oh man, if I put this in, this fill here adds this thing. Sometimes there's a conversation of like, well, maybe don't play that.
Yeah, that's a great point. The element of restraint can be super powerful. Super powerful.
But that's something that you need to start planning and talk about in the pre-production phase.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you need to add and what do you need to take away? Which, speaking of taking things away, Brandon, take away what production is, because I mean, this is something that Brandon really shines at.
So my phone. If you're not watching on YouTube, then you don't know what's going on.
He just dropped his phone.
I just dropped my phone.
But yeah, it's something that he's got experience with. So yeah, definitely take it away.
Production, pre-production, it all involves in kind of like arranging and recording and kind of sound choice and making the final vision come to life before you move on to editing, the mixing, the mastering. Because all these are different stages and they usually happen in sequential order. Usually, it's not the case all the time. But you're not going to find mastering in the first part of the chain, right? Of this order, right? Like, so you're really just, you're arranging your songwriting, you're coming up with the overall intent, the overall vibe of the track, that you still have to explore in the production stage, but you have an idea, right? You're bringing the ideas to the table and you're trying to manifest that. And then once you move out of pre-production, which is more of the songwriting kind of stage, maybe sound choice, planning, maybe you have like a couple snares you like that you want to try, maybe you have a couple kicks you like that you want to try, and then you move into the actual production. You really start laying it down, and that's where everything kind of cultivates and manifests itself. Sean made a really great point, that moving into the production stage, I think I really like, and then, like, I'm going to go back to what we have written here too in a second, but like moving into that production stage, this is when I like to present all the ideas, right? We throw everything into the song, and like, oh, this sounds cool, let's put it in there, see if it works. Oh, this sounds cool, that's awesome. Because there's nothing like producing, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of where we're at in the line, but now that I'm thinking about it,
just go, man.
There's nothing like producing scared, right? I'm scared to do this because what if it sounds bad, right? Or I'm scared to do this because what if this person thinks it's bad, right? This is the point where it's just like put everything on the table, and then what Sean says, dial it back as you go, right? Like, oh, let's take this out. This is too much. This pad is way too blossoming, it's way too slow on the attack. It just feels like it's out of place. And this is killing the forward momentum of the track. I use that one an awful lot because there's a lot that can do that. So this is like the stage where you start putting everything together and you really start cultivating that sound. One of the most fun parts can also be one of the most frustrating parts of this entire process. It is tough. It's tough, especially when you're more unplanned in the pre-production stage. There's less intent, there's less vision, and then it's like, okay, well, you're cultivating a vision with somebody else who might not necessarily see it that way, and that's when conflicts can happen too. So but it can also be great too, because then it's like, oh, I never thought of that when Adam, I don't know who the fuck Adam is, thinking about, I guess, the monitor Sean's has presented this is great, and it changed the entire vibe of the song. So production is it's a very heavy process, and a process that is obviously needed, because then if you don't have the production process, you don't have a song. So.
Well, that's where I think there are I think it's worth taking a step back and noticing that there are different production styles.
Yes.
And each one does have value to it. Like you said, you like to use a production stage of let's throw things at the wall and just try it. So we can see what works, see what doesn't, and then mold it around from there.
Totally.
The other production style is I have a single idea in my head. Now let's make everything specifically tailored to get that end result.
Totally.
And I think the biggest example of that is Berry Gordy with Motown.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, totally.
It was
Motown
an assembly
had
line. That sound.
Yeah.
It was an assembly line because he went in saying, this is the idea of how it should sound in the end.
Yep.
All the artists that were scouted for it, all like they had the backing band, the room, everything was specifically set up to have that Motown sound.
Yes.
And everything that came out achieved that goal because there was that singular production and pre-production and producer in the seat that caused that to kind of happen.
Yep.
So that's a different kind of production style, and they both are very valid.
Totally.
So just kind of thinking about, okay, going into it, what is the approach that you'd like to take? And kind of going into how this all started with being stale or not is, do we feel like it's getting stale? Is it time to try a different production method where we do throw things at the wall and see what fits? Or is it, man, we're hitting our stride. Let's keep doing this. Let's ride it. We know exactly what works and what doesn't. So let's do what works and what we know the sound of to get that end result at the end.
Absolutely.
Because like either way, though, that is such a key element in creating the unique style, the unique sound of what you're going to end up with at the end.
Absolutely.
Is that forethought and just the idea of approaching it. Because if you are going to approach it like Brandon does, you throw things at the wall, you have to go with the mindset of no idea is a bad idea.
Right.
You just need to try it.
Yeah.
And it's only going to take a couple minutes
to
throw it together and see if it works or not.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point, because I think a lot of the way that I approach production is I'm working a lot of one-on-ones. So it's like we don't always have that extra hand in the room, extra idea in the room, you know? So it's like we're really starting from ground up at this point. But if you're working with a band, like you were kind of like alluding to in more producers or whoever's in the room with you at the time, that knows like we're going to get this sound for this, and we're going to be intentional here and do this, like that is so nice too. And so and that's just another aspect of the production mindset and kind of like production theory in general, you know.
And unfortunately that's kind of uncommon now.
It is a little bit.
Producers in the studio, I mean in big studios they're there, but like a lot of like independent artists, what they're doing, there isn't the one guy who their whole job is to view it as a whole and say, yes, this is the right direction, or no, this is the wrong direction.
Totally.
So it might be a good idea to elect someone in the band, or have that conversation with your engineer of like, hey, I really like the stuff that you do. Obviously you have an ear for certain things. Like, can you step in and fill the producer role a little bit and give me ideas and what we can do, which is something that Brandon's really good at. When people come in, like you talk to them like, hey, do you want this to just be recorded, mix it, get it out there, or do you want more of an active role? And a lot of times people will tell you, no, I want you to take that active role, because like stuff that comes out of your studio and stuff that comes out of my studio, there is a sound because we have our own biases and we would part our own kind of thing. And if that's what somebody wants, then definitely that's who you want to work with.
Exactly. That's a great point. I just had this conversation with somebody I work with last week. Her name's Honor. She's great. And she came in. She's like, hey, she texted me beforehand. So this is an example of a production idea, right? She texts me and she goes, hey, I'm going to come and record this song, but you don't have to record it into Pro Tools or anything. I just want to record the song. I was like, oh, interesting. I texted her back and I said, hey, that's cool. We can do that on the phone or whatever. I'm going to record into Pro Tools anyways, because it's here. Doesn't take me any time to set up, and we'll have a backup copy just in case we ever need it, right? So we can revisit it. And that's like a, and when she got here to the studio, I was like, hey, so is this going to be on the album, or is this just an idea for you to work with later? And she said, every time I come here, my intention is going to be, it's going on the album. I'm like, that is great to know, because now first of all, I don't ever have to ask the question again. And number two, whenever she wants to schedule a session, I know exactly what we'll be doing. Like we're doing this for real. Like I don't have to be like,
we're here for keeps, son.
Right. Exactly. We're not here to do drafts or cut drafts, which is totally a valid way to work too. But we're here this is the final product. Like this is what we're doing. And having that conversation up front, like Sean mentioned, is so important. Because like the days leading up to the production, we're obviously thinking about it, right? Like we see it on the calendar. So we have to change our mindset and adapt to be like, okay, I can generally guess how this session is going to go. I can generally guess what the sound is going to be like.
Yeah.
And then you kind of like, okay, what are the tools to get us there?
Yeah.
And then you get in there, and then it's like, time to ride.
Yeah, and
Let's let it
as an
rock.
engineer and
Yeah.
as the producer mindset, you're thinking like, okay, well, and how do I set up these tools to make
Right.
it as seamless for
And
them to
yes,
get that
yes.
easier, quicker, and keep that vibe in the studio, that
Yep.
energy in the studio going.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned like 5 minutes ago, because it's in the back of my mind. But the throw it at the wall, see if it sticks kind of thing that we were talking about. You had mentioned that, yes, it only takes a couple minutes to try something. And that's where things start to fall off the rails for some people.
Yes.
Because a few minutes costs money, right?
Yes.
So there's that constant conflict between producer and artist at that point. So it's like, not only do we have to have the mindset of, hey, we have to be cognizant and make sure we're not trying everything, because I don't want to keep the artist in here for that long and have to charge them for that time. Like, that's not fair. That's not what we're here. That's not the business we're in. But there's also the flip side for the artist, who I presume is listening at the moment, that has to be like, hey, I have to have some leniency so we can develop the sound that we're looking for and explore options.
Yeah.
There's that delicate balance there. And we'll talk about this later when we talk about what to look for in a producer and doing it versus doing it yourself and everything like that. But I wanted to mention that because that was so key. And if I forget to talk about it in that segment, we at least covered it. So
for sure.
Yeah, because that's super important.
And that's where like having that conversation beforehand really comes into key of like, hey, are you coming in? Do you want the engineer, like either Brandon or I, in the case of coming into our studios, to take a more producer role?
Yes.
Or do you want it, this is my song, this is how I want it, I'm the producer now?
Yes. Yeah. Right. And that's a great point too, and because I recently also had somebody come in and she was like, hey, this is my first time doing this in a studio. And she's like, I just want to make sure like, everything's cool and everything. And I always do like a consultation before. Like, I'm always like, come hang out for an hour. We'll chat. And we'll talk about goals and everything that you want to do. And I told her, I was very specific. I was like, I'm not here to take your song and make it my song. I'm here to take your song to continue to make it your song and to what you want to hear at the end. Yeah. And that is so key. And if a producer doesn't tell you that, or you never had that conversation with a producer, somebody's going to have to bring it up eventually. Yeah. And if it never comes up, it might not be a good fit at that point, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And there's the flip side. Maybe you want the producer to take everything and make you a song, and then it's just your song, right? Maybe you come with an idea and you want to make it your idea, right? Yeah. And then the producer might not have that idea, right? And it just gets a little messy. So I think what we're overall just trying to say is communication is super key. Oh yeah, as we always do. But like the production is probably one of the most important places to have communication.
Because there are so many approaches and ways that a producer and an artist, there's so many ways that the relationship can unfold with how involved do you want them to be, how little involved do you want them to be, where do you want them to be involved in the process, where do you not want them to be involved in the process, and also, especially when you're starting off, like, hey, for the first couple songs, these are my songs. Yeah. Let me do it my way, so that way you can hear what I want this whole thing to roughly sound like. Yep. And then based off of now what you know that I'm coming at it from, you can then incorporate your thoughts and your experiences and the references as a whole to be like, hey, well, I noticed in a lot of your references, you like these aspects in the song, or these tonality things, or this sort of recording style or performance style. So let's kind of now take it and adjust it so it fits within your style. So it's still your style versus walking and being like, oh, you want it to sound like Gregory Alan Isakov? Yep. Boom, we gotta do this, 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 and this. Well, then it's less about your style incorporating those elements than that style incorporating your elements. Yeah, good point. If that's a backwards ass way to put it, but yeah, just it might be good to start off saying, no, this is how I want it. Just record it, do what I want, and then as time goes on, as you learn my style, now you can start incorporating ideas. Yes, absolutely. That's how it happens oftentimes in my studio, where people will come in and we just record it, do their song, and then by the second, third, fourth song, the occasional of like, hey, based on your previous songs and based on what I know you like, can I try something? Yeah, totally. It always starts off like, hey, can I try something? Yep. And then we try it out, and we like it or we don't like it, and the relationship can kind of go in that direction or not. Yep, totally. But it's always that kind of like invitation of like, hey, is there like I'm learning what's in service of your song? Can we start having these conversations and really being creative in the studio? Because that's the point of time to be it. Yep. And at that point, there might be some flexibility in terms of like,
whether or not you even have a session. Maybe you just have the producer work on it by himself, and he just charges a flat rate right at that point, instead of you going into the studio, because I definitely get it. Budgets can be tight, and if you don't want to be a part of that process and make those decisions, that's often the best way to go. And that's where a lot of beats are bought, or stolen, and you kind of go from there, right? So lots of different mindsets to kind of think about, and that's kind of like what we're kind of nailing out too, is like you have to have a certain mindset to work a certain way, right? And whatever the best mindset or process for you is, you have to be okay with that happening, right? And I remembered my last point for our opener. Can I say it real quick?
Go for it.
Can you remind everybody of what the opener was?
So the opener was, how do you prevent your music from going stale?
Yes. So I always tell everybody, I still watch YouTube tutorials on mixing and production and stuff, because I don't want to miss out on something cool, right? So like, instead of like me sitting alone downstairs or whatever and just like tweaking endlessly, I like to watch videos and be like, oh, this was really cool, I'm gonna try to incorporate in something. And then not only that, but like there's a lot of people out there, a lot of big artists that do production classes and stuff that will often show you like, hey, here's here's what I do to get this sound, or here's what I did to get this sound. And that can keep things so fresh too. I finally remembered it. I didn't want to lose it. Thank you. I know that was a little off the rails.
No, you're right though. And I think that's kind of a good way of kind of transitioning into, we talked about production styles, what is production, but now let's specifically go into the aspects in which you are going to be dialing into when you are doing the production process. So specifically, there's kind of like pre-production and post-production. Pre-production is all the stuff you do before you go into like, okay, time to record the song, time to make it a unit, a song that can then be put out there. And there's post-production of, okay, well, we've got the recordings, we've done the stuff. Now what can we do to like alter it to get it into this sort of direction so that way we can complete it? And production is all throughout the song. It's the arrangement. So even like having that conversation with like, okay, well, how does the flow go? How does this verse structure go? Should I double up the verse length in the beginning and then shorten it at the second time? Or that's all production. Instrument choice, specifically, like not even just, okay, should an acoustic guitar be here or should an electric guitar be here? If you're in a studio that has a lot of options like Brandon's does with like guitars, okay, well, what guitar tone fits the style you're going for the most? Let's mess around with miking techniques on the amps, the amp choice of itself, or are we going to go direct in and use an amp emulator or for our IR response or anything like that. Effects you're going to do. Do you want a dry vocal? Do you want a wet vocal? Do you want harmonies, backing harmonies? Do you want like what kind of aspects are you looking to? And not just the composition aspect of it, but how is this supposed to make the song feel? And based on how you want the song to feel using these elements, how are we going to tackle recording it and using the right instruments to get that end vibe? If you want a really spacious vibe or kind of more of a softer, less attacky vocal part, then you might want to be like, okay, cool. Well, let's use a dynamic microphone and have you step 2-3 feet back away from the microphone so that it really doesn't pick up the proximity effect or the quick transients of the mouth. So that way, when we blend it all together, it sounds more smooth and distant. That's a production choice. Since you have that conversation of what the end goal is going to be in mind. Or like the instrument choice of, you know what, this is a really bright poppy acoustic. Let's try that other acoustic that's got more mellow, or let's put nylon strings on, or put a I have it behind you on the amp. It's the Vibrakill to make it sound like a rubber bridge or things like that, because it's finger picking. It sounds more lo-fi. All these things that you can do beforehand make it much easier in the post process. Much easier in the post process. I mean, I think you nailed that. I really don't have anything to add to that, guy, because I think you pretty much covered it. And a lot of this, like, it does sound like a little overwhelming, if especially if you haven't done this process before. But a lot of the time is just trying it, right? And being slightly cognizant of the decisions you're making and exactly why you're making these choices. It really does sound like, oh man, I have to have a list written down, and like if that's helpful for you, by all means. But a lot of the time it's just natural. It's a very innate thing where it's like, oh, I'm gonna try this doesn't sound good, let's try something else, and then you just start exploring like that. So if that all sounded very, very overwhelming, that's usually not the case. Especially if you are going to somebody, which is the main thing. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit,
please.
Because we did talk about how production affects your sound, but more so why having a producer versus DIYing the production itself can be incredibly beneficial if you are going to a producer who has experience thinking about these kinds of things beforehand, or going to a studio where the engineer can take up the producer role who has the experience doing that.
Totally.
It's super helpful to bounce off these ideas and say, hey, this is my end goal, but I don't know how to go there.
Right.
And relying on their experience and knowing that, hey, in their catalog, in their portfolio, I like the tones that they're making, so I trust that they're going to help get my song to where it needs to go.
Right.
And relying on their expertise as a producer to help contribute their creative ideas to get the sound that you want in your head.
Exactly.
And help develop your song and your sound further.
Yep, totally.
Because you might not know, like, hey, I want this blues kind of tones, how you need some subtle saturation and all these things in it. And then you come into a studio and the guy's like, oh yeah, cool, throw you on a 2 mic, and then we'll throw it into a preamp that's got like overdrive and op amp, but we can kind of blend it in just to get a little bit of grit on the way in. So that way, it just, when it hits the compressor hard, that saturation really drives forward, and it's a lot of energy that goes along with your vocal. It's better to do that pre than post.
Totally.
Things like that.
Sean makes an excellent point. This is where the nuances start to come in.
Yes.
And understanding those nuances and how to get there and arrive at that sound. So let's take a country song, for example. I'm doing a country song right now.
Nice.
And
I just finished one.
Oh, did you? Nice, dude. Hell yeah.
Did you look into the pedal steel guy?
I did. I checked him out. I haven't bought from him yet.
That's fair.
But I will. I will, because he's good.
He's so good.
He's really good.
So good.
But I was I'm working on this track, and my buddy Dan brought it to me from another producer, mind you. So this is a rescue project, lack of a better way to say it, right? Mainly,
man, I wish there was tea in here, because I'd be sipping
I know,
it
right?
now.
I know. Mainly because the other guy wasn't doing what Dan thought was the vision, right?
Yeah.
He took it and ran with it in a different direction, and now it's like, okay, now we got to kind of like reel this in, bring it back. And Dan was like, hey, I want this snare sound to sound like this, and he sent me a reference, and I was like, that's great, that's awesome, good start, and I heard it, I'm like, I know exactly how to get that type of snare sound. We just have to layer fucking 18 different snares into one, and then we're gonna get that snare sound. And so I took one good bass line snare, right? Not bass line as I'm doing I know. I had to make the joke. But I took my regular snare that I use, for drums, exactly. For like regular drums, I layered that in there, and I was like, okay, let's shove a bunch of samples in here and get that sound, that very processed, big fat fucking snare drum sound. And we did it. I sent it back to him. He's like, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Now, if you got somebody that was not super accustomed to that, let's say you're doing more bluesy stuff, more very natural stuff.
Yeah, let's say the guy went to me. I wouldn't know how to do it.
but maybe though, right? Like, so maybe you go to somebody who doesn't do that kind of thing. They wouldn't know exactly how to get there. They'd be like maybe spending some time on EQ, maybe some like super massive compression. That's not like, we got to start here first, and then we can move on to that stuff, right? Sure. So like there's nuance in it. Same thing with like pop versus hip hop. You go to a hip hop producer, they're using their samples that they have from their packs, right? And they will, like, hip hop does layer stuff, like, don't get me wrong, but it's not as heavily layered as pop is. So if you're gonna get something unique in pop, you're gonna layer 3-4 snares, claps, fucking snaps into one thing, and then you have this very unique sound. You're not really doing that with hip hop, right? So
whereas you do acoustic or rock or things like I do, it's all about the processing, the effects, but it's still like a single source.
Exactly.
And it's all about tracking it and recording it the right way.
Because you want authenticity.
Exactly.
You want it to sound like a
so
fucking
someone came
band.
with me to a pop track, and that happens sometimes. People hit me up like, hey man, I got this, I'm a rapper, I want this, or hey man, I do pop, I want this. And I'm like, I'm not the best guy for you.
No, totally.
And that's just from that experience thing. And as you mentioned, like, you're right. When you're looking for a producer, that's definitely what you have to keep in mind of, okay, do they have that experience? Are they going to know what I want? Do they speak the lingo? Do they have the tools in their tool belt to make this work out the way? Especially if you don't know how to get it there. But also it can be valuable potentially if you do know how to get those kinds of sounds yourself. To go to a producer who has a different skill set to be like, hey, I kind of want to do like a cross amongst these two. Here's this layered snare. Now process it like you would, or now think of it like you would for a country song.
Right.
And let's get that kind of like rawness to come out of these samples.
Exactly.
And get that energy to come out of these samples versus that super clean production of pop. So
great example, Post Malone.
Oh my God.
He just did his country album. And when you listen to it, it sounds like a not old, but older country album. There's there's not a ton of samples. Everything's very organic in there, natural sounding. And this is Post Malone, who comes from pop and hip hop. So he pairs up with somebody who knows country really well, and they get a bunch of musicians in there and do it organically and authentically. And maybe there's like a couple of samples in here or there for reinforcement, but like, and I'm just using samples as the foundation here, right? Just keeping it simple. And then they cultivate this song together, and it sounds like a modern, old style kind of country song. And it's a cool, natural blend that we haven't heard all that much.
Because you have the experience and the knowledge from both of those skill sets that probably there's that communicated vision of, hey, this is where we want to end up with. Take your knowledge, take my knowledge, let's put them together and make that. Because a good producer will get the best out of your music and move it in that direction that it needs to be.
Absolutely. Great point. Great point.
And that's pretty much all of what it is for like looking for the right producer, looking for that experience, the expertise, and also like the chemistry between you and them. That's a huge thing. So if you can sit down and have a conversation with someone before saying, yep, let's work together, that's necessary. Like, hey man, let's get coffee, let's like chill in the studio for a bit, let's just spend an afternoon just kind of like fiddling around and jamming, and let me show you my stuff and like let me know what you're hearing so we can make sure we're on the same page before we really dive into that next process. I mean, a great thing you can do is if you have demos, show them the demos, be like, hey man, what are your thoughts on this? Let's sit down and have a listening party. Or if you don't have demos, just get out an acoustic or keys or whatever you do on and just play it for them and listen before you start explaining what you want. Be like, hey, these are my references, this is where I want it to go roughly. Now let me listen to your thoughts. And it's a great way to be like, are you already starting on a similar page or are you completely different? And if they're completely different, you know, it might just be because there's not a great communication of the ideas, but it could also just be like, oh, they're hearing it in a different direction than you want to go. And it's way better to figure that out before you're paying them to show up to your sessions and be part of the revision process and really get involved in everything that you're doing. Versus just, you know, hey, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. A lot of these things are the same advice and the same things that we tell you when looking for a mixing or recording engineer.
I'm glad you brought that up because like a lot of this kind of points to almost last week's episode too, is like how to find the right mastering engineer, right? And there are some similarities in, like here as well. Although the mastering engineer tends to be a little less hands-on, if that kind of makes sense, you know. So you might not always get the coffee with them, but like you have a general idea of what you want or what he wants to sound like, what you wanted to sound like, he or she, and then you kind of like go from there, right? Because there's more technicalities, I guess, with mastering, you know. But I'm glad you brought that up, because there's similarities between choosing people. The chemistry is huge. That's probably, it's almost number one, you know, because like if you can't even vibe with somebody in the studio and you're going to sit there and produce with them for 8, 12, 15 hours, man, you're talking about a slog fest, man.
And also if you want them to have their influence on your music and that headbutt, that rough, it can make you lose confidence in it.
Oh, very much so.
But because everything's not black and white, it's gray, that may be also what you need.
That's true.
You might need that.
Maybe you need conflict.
Right?
Just a little bit. Not punching each other. You know, it's worked for some bands though. You know, people have fought in the studio and it's worked for some bands like Metallica and stuff. So there you go. So maybe you do need that. I don't know. Don't hit anybody. Don't punch anybody.
Unless they
do it only if you need it. Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, you make a really great point because
don't start fights, end them.
I like that. And then with however you need to.
I'm not responsible for these statements or your actions.
We'll let you decide on that. That's not our official advice, but it is kind of not really. Anyways,
it reminds me of the. I'm sorry, I'm going off.
No, go ahead.
Have you seen The Aristocrats?
I have a long time ago.
There's a scene where the one like little girl kitten is like, ladies do not start fights, they end them.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that. Yeah, dude. That's exactly what it is.
So be a lady.
Yes.
That's our advice to you. Be a lady.
Be a lady. Yes. You made a really good point though with bringing a demo in mind. And like you said, it doesn't have to be necessarily something you've recorded, but something that is often very helpful is voice memos. And voice memos have saved sessions, you know, just because people have ideas, right? We get ideas innately during the day. We're cutting the grass, we're taking the kids to school, whatever the case may be. All of a sudden, there it is. That is a fleeting moment. You have like 1 minute to capture it. And that is a very fleeting. Pull out your phone and just hum into it, talk into it, do something into it so you remember it for later, and actually write it down too, like name it, be good, because like it's really hard to go back and find some of these, and sometimes
it can be kind of funny though to go back and listen, like what did I do that
like,
for?
oh, that's a weird idea. Yeah. And like sometimes I'll hear people in the actual studio booth listening, and they're like, hey, I just got to reference this real quick. I'll hear the little faint I'm like, that's exactly what it's perfect. It's perfect. That's exactly what you need to do.
Yes.
And you don't have to be a professional to do this, right? Just something simple. Or like Sean said, even better, come over and play it, because like there's nothing quite like it. Now, this is where it gets a little tough. Once you have the idea down, you play it for the producer. I want to mention this. We don't have this written down, but talking about attainable goals for your sound, and that's a little bit complex, but I'm not going to go too far into too deep into it. But to make sure you and the producer are on the same page, you have to be realistic with what you want to go for.
Yeah.
I recently did a song like about 2 months ago now that this guy brought to me, and I originally had envisioned it as a pop punk kind of track. He's a singer-songwriter. I envisioned it as pop punk, and he's delved in this before, but now he wants to do a pop track with it. Those are three very, very different things. And I could not for the life of me fucking get my head out of the pop punk track, right? So now I'm having to
you're
change.
Hearing it as
exactly.
It's already in your head. That's what the song is.
Exactly. So now I have to, first of all, take a song that doesn't necessarily fit the pop genre, in my opinion, right? And now work with it and try to find this path that we're looking for, right? And that was so hard. That was really tough. And like that's cool and all. And like I think you can do that, but you have to be very communicative up front. And that's something I probably should have communicated a little better, because we had that conflicting idea. And he knew what we had that conflicting idea, and we still decided to go through it anyways. But there's always that case. So attainable goals. Let's talk about that with your producer too. I think that's super key, and I think that's one of the benefits of hiring a producer is to talk about that. Like, hey, is this song, is this rhythm even attainable to make a track like this? And usually it is, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's just a roadblock, like it was for you.
Yeah.
It just took a while to flip the headset around, have those conversations. But sometimes it is the the brick wall.
There's a point where you end up breaking through. It's just a point that is hard to find really quickly. It just takes time. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that too. Yeah. That's a really important key.
Yeah. Before we end, I want to take a quick moment and recognize the last style of producer that I've seen pop up in the past 5-10 years. Now that remote recording, mixing, and all that stuff has gotten more and more popular, is the producer that will take your demo and then compose, perform, mix, and master a full song around it. There's a guy I know in Nashville who that's what he does.
I was going to say very popular in Nashville.
Yes. He works with Christian artists who will record a demo, send it to him. He will record a whole song around it, compose a whole song around it, have them like coach them through how to re-record at home, or have them come in to do a vocal layer that's to that song, and then produce it and mix it, master it, and make the final song out of it. Where it's literally just a guitar and singing, a rough demo, or humming for like back melodies. Like he'll take those elements, those voice memos, put them all together and make a final song. Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people really do know. That's what they specialize in. Definitely not a cheap option.
No.
Because you are asking them to compose, perform, record, mix, master, the whole process. But and it's less, you're less likely to get your own kind of input into the style of it. You're really relying on their expertise and their style. So you want to make sure, if that's what the route you're going, that you like their end products and you like that kind of style that they're going for, because you kind of lose a little bit of that influence since you're not in the studio with them and you're not performing a lot of these things. But it can be a really cool way to get a fully done, professionally recorded, mixed, mastered, completed song based off of just a rough demo or something that you're not really used to or thinking of in fully fleshing it out. That they have expertise of thinking and putting together all that stuff throughout the whole process.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what the role of producer has kind of turned into. At least that's a subset of the producer role in the studio and in music creation that has been just blowing up in the past 5-10 years.
Totally.
Now that remote stuff is just more and more popular and people can record and do all these things in their own session.
Yep. That happens a lot down in Nashville.
Yes.
I know that for damn sure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in one of those major music hubs, I guarantee you that you can find it. If you're a little bit outside of a music hub, might be a little harder to find, but not impossible. But like Sean said, you can work remotely too. So these guys do remote stuff. They have musicians they can bring in to play your stuff too. Like they have it all. They have it all.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the wrap up of production, finding a producer, the different roles a producer can take, pre, post, all that kind of stuff. Really just trying to highlight that it's not just about recording. It's about really crafting the sound and making sure that throughout the whole process, you're able to get that end envisioned sound, that end completed song that you are looking for that really represents you as an artist.
Arrangement is key.
Yes.
Arrangement is key.
It's way
that sets
more
you
important.
up for everything. So if you get the arrangement right, you're golden. You're golden. Outside of songwriting, of course.
No, for sure,
that's
for
baseline,
sure.
you know. So
yeah. So with that being said, thank you for listening to this podcast. Hope this was a very informational one for you. We had fun kind of riffing on and talking about it. Production is something that I dabble in more so like in the studio, but I don't go nearly as deep as Brandon does because he's just got a lot more experience and is really good at it.
Well,
so if you're looking to get some production done on your style, on your music, and you'd like to work with Brandon, you can hit him up.
You can find more information about that at studio222recording.com. I actually don't offer it on my website. So if you are interested in it, fill out a quote request form, and I will ask you a bunch of questions in an email back to you, and that will open up the floodgates to that. And we'll talk about exactly how it works and everything like that and go into detail. You can find me on social media, but I'm not going to tell you where. Sean, what about you? Where can we find more information about you?
Yeah, if you've got acoustic, rock, or folk music, sometimes blues that you need to have, mixed and mastered, I do remote work. You can contact me at swsrecordings.com. I have a submission form you can fill out there as well. I also do one-on-one artist development coaching. So it's basically this podcast, but more specialized and specified for you and what your goals are within the music industry. So kind of helping you set your goals, plan your next course of action, get some connections going, figure out what the next steps are in order to grow your career. So if you're interested in that as well, once again, you can fill out a form and contact me at swsrecordings.com. Other than that, if you just want to talk to both of us for specifically this podcast, like if you have any ideas that you'd like us to cover in the future, things you're struggling with, and you just want some feedback, you can message us or email us at podcast@musicmakerscookbook.com. We'd like to hear from you, see what things you want us to talk about in the future. Kind of help us figure out what kind of recipes we need to look at and what kind of things we need to cook up in this kitchen here.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. So with that all being said, thanks for joining us in the kitchen today. Hope you enjoyed the meal that we put out. And with that all being said,
bon appetit.